Welcome to Forehand Month. This is a special month because we're going to show you how to get more power on your forehand. Now, why is this important to you? Well, if you want to get better, you want to beat better players, win those tough matches, you need to have a weapon. You need to have something that allows you to force your opponent to make mistakes, or at least that they can fear or be worried about you hitting either stronger shots or even winners sometimes. And the only way you're going to do that is to create more power on your forehand. And so what I want to do is give you a simple formula for doing this by using simple progressions. And if you're thinking like, I can't do this, I've already watched videos and it didn't work for me, I want to show you how one of our members transformed his forehand in just 41 days. Now, we use a very simple method here, which is this: we identify what the problem was, then we isolated it, and then we use simple improvement progressions just so we could do this over and over, and gradually got a little bit more difficult each and every time, but making sure that he never took on something too big that he couldn't do. And so after you watch this, you're going to understand exactly the progressions and the type of progressions that you need to go through to have the same transformation on your forehand. So let's get started. So let's start off with a before and after pic of how we got started with John's forehand. This is John's forehand before. You can really see here how, as he's starting to swing, he's not using much of his body. You can tell because the Nike sign right here isn't rotating. You can also look at his hips. This position here doesn't look so bad, but as we get through the swing, you can really see how it's just really arm, and that is the first problem. Now look at the after. You can really see now how John's been able to use his body. And if you compare it between here and here, you see a dramatic difference in how John's using his hips here versus his hips here, and how his arm is doing most of the stroke compared to the follow through and the twisting action that his hips and shoulders are doing, bringing the racket all the way around. So we identified first what's the problem, which is John isn't really using the rest of his body to hit the ball. You can tell, again, like we said, because the hips aren't moving. And that's the very first step we want to start with, which is identifying the problem. And the only way you can really, truly identify the problem is using video. By using video, we could slow the video down and really see what John's doing. The next thing we want to go through is start to isolate what are the steps we're going to do to help him progress. Now, this is one of the first videos we did with John, really explaining the three-step process and also the 3 steps he's going to use to improve his forehand and transform it. The first thing was to start with a unit turn. We readjusted his unit turn so he was using his non-dominant left hand on the racket to push it back. By using this non-dominant left hand on the racket, it really helps coil his shoulders and create some separation between his hips. The next position is the racket drop and the leg load. So we started to get him to drop the racket and load his back leg. Now, this may seem a little extreme because we're using the backpack as a kind of measure of him dropping the racket, but when we sometimes push things to extreme, where you actually have to go back and hit the ball, a lot of times by pushing it to the extreme, it comes back a little bit. So it usually lands right in the middle of exactly where we want it to be, and that's what was in the instance for John. The next part is the most crucial, important part, which is pulling the racket forward using his hips. Now you can really tell the difference between the first video we saw where John wasn't using his hips and this one. You can tell because the shoulders, the hand, and the hips are all aligned. What I mean by aligned is, looking from this angle, you can see how they all make almost a triangle type shape over John, meaning that he's hitting these 3 points. Once he understood these, then we would have him go back and pretty much shadow this over and over again. And then we would move to hitting a drop fed ball, but only after he's able to perform the shadows, knowing that he can do this all the time. Now this sequence is very common in drills we do where we have the student shadow and then drop feed. It's a great progression, and generally use this through all the progressions of moving back. Now this may seem really simple, but it's really important to understand. You have to have your shadows matching your real swings, and John was able to do this consistently. This next video is where John's little bit halfway between the baseline and service line, and he's hitting a ball. Now the key is this: John's already done some shadow drills, and he's also done some drop fed balls. And then he's progressing because he's executing those two at least 70% to hitting balls past the service line and halfway between the baseline. Now, the key here in using videos, you can tell right here, is that John's still performing the correct technique. When we get to the contact strike zone here, you can see how his shoulders, hips, and hand are at contact. And it's not like the first one where we saw in the before picture where he wasn't using his body. And this is a great telltale sign that he's okay with moving back. Now again, the progression we did from here is have John shadow, do some drop fed, and then he actually used the ball machine. The importance of using a ball machine or a pro is making sure that they can feed the ball consistently to a location so you don't have to worry about moving. You're just focusing on making sure you're hitting the right spots. After this, you can really tell how John started to smooth out the stroke a lot more. This was really important because as he started getting more comfortable, we allowed him to get more balls where he didn't have to do as many drop feds, and actually occasionally did a couple shadows just to make sure he was oriented with the right stroke. And then he went to hitting more balls. And because of this, you can really see how, again, he's still hitting those marks. Again, we don't want to have you take too big of a jump. Most players make the huge mistake of, they start on the service line, just shadow 2 times, they hit 1 drop fed, and they're off to the races, usually going all the way back to the baseline, receiving somebody, hitting a ball, or using a ball machine. This isn't the way. Now, the other thing to mention here is that John did this over the course of 41 days. So what this means is that he spent a lot of time doing shadow swings at each progression stage before he got all the way back to the baseline here. And now you can see in full frame how his stroke has really smoothed itself out, and he's using his body to power a stroke. You can do the exact same thing, but you have to have the patience and time to work on simply doing the progressions over and over again until you get it. It's really a matter of taking your time and not jumping the gun and try to move all the way back from the service line to the baseline, and continue to do the shadow drills and using video to make sure that the shadows match your actual swings. If you can do this, you can get the same results that John got in 41 days or better. Now, after you watch this video, you should realize you can do this too. Don't waste any more time. Really start to take the time to develop your forehand into a true weapon that can help you win extra matches against those really tough players. And so I invite you to go check out Forehand Power Formula, where you're going to learn the exact progressions to change your forehand and add more power so you can start beating those better players today.